What happened to Nancy Guthrie? As we follow the ongoing investigation into the Missing Today show co-host mom, we want to bring in our South Florida-based former FBI Special Agent Stuart Kaplan here to join us in this conversation. And Stuart, thank you so much for being here. Let's start with this case. It has drawn a lot of attention all across the country, I'm sure even around the world. What are investigators zeroing in right now?
Well, look, Lulie, I had said originally that technology in this particular case was at the forefront of breaking the case wide open. And I think obviously you've seen some of the fruits of the labor of the FBI with its private partners, that the FBI in the last couple of years has really enhanced its capabilities with respect to undertaking these type of investigations, utilizing and deploying technology that is either not known to the public or available to the public to be able to assist them in getting additional evidence to eventually identify and apprehend those people, for example, that may be responsible for the abduction, kidnapping, or worst case scenario, murder of Nancy Guthrie. I think obviously one of the most significant byproducts of the technology that has been utilized is obviously being able to go back and reconfigure and grab data points from a Ring doorbell that apparently was not online, and notwithstanding it was disconnected, still be able to retrieve those data footprints or those digital footprints and be able to go back and solicit or elicit that type of imagery and video to identify obviously the person at the front door. What is happening now is based upon those photographs and those videos, for example, artificial intelligence as well as facial recognition, biometrics is now being deployed. Most people don't realize that notwithstanding an individual may be hiding or obscuring their face, in this particular case where someone is observed wearing a mask, facial recognition really deals with geo mapping or measurements with respect to certain the width of your nose, the distance between your eyes, those type of facial features that can in fact be detected by very sophisticated technology, notwithstanding the person's face is obscured. That information in of itself can then be run through certain databases to try to come up with an individual and match that individual, by way of example, to a driver's license database. Articles of clothing, the backpack, the holster, those things are now being identified by its manufacturer, where it would have been likely sold, who potentially purchased it, and then, of course, correlating all of this information to zero in on the individual who may be at that doorstep.
And I do want to point out it was completely dark, but it's pretty incredible the advancement in technology, how you could still see some details. Even though it was pitch black, is that a challenge for law enforcement?
This case is a challenge in as much as it's in a very isolated area where, from what I understand, it is not till you leave the general area of where Nancy Guthrie's house was located, which would mean you'd have to travel, from what I understand, maybe a mile and a half until you get to a major intersection where you could then be picked up on CCTV or license plate readers or any of the combination of the both. But keep in mind, you could basically walk into this neighborhood, you can navigate it on foot. And so you have to consider whether or not this individual is a neighbor, someone within the area. And of course, keep in mind, to walk a couple of miles in the middle of the night undetected because it's so dark and isolated, you would probably, notwithstanding maybe running into wildlife, you would probably be able to navigate that being unchallenged by anybody at 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah, I want to talk about what we're seeing today as of Thursday morning. A lot of investigators, authorities are at the Guthrie home. It appears that there is a white tent outside. Walk us through what's happening. Why the tent?
Sure. That tent generally is used for evidence processing, and that means that evidence that is at the house that may not necessarily be transportable, and it would be better to preserve the integrity of that evidence at the house, process it at the house. They set up that tent for two reasons. Number one is for evidence preservation. That is, we want to prevent outside environmental factors from tainting our testing or the piece of evidence that we have collected. And also, maybe to shield the media attention so that perhaps the media is not observing some of the devices or some of the resources or assets that may be available to the evidence response teams. There are efforts to obviously keep a lot of these assets confidential or secret. And so that also is a factor when you see this tent now outside the front of Nancy Guthrie's house.
Mhm. A source close to CBS News told, confirms that there was a discovery of a pair of black gloves during a search. Walk us through what investigators are doing with that.
Well, look, on one hand, you could say, wow, that could be the breakthrough that we were looking for, because assuming
Mhm.
that those pair of gloves that have now been recovered were worn without any additional layering of gloves underneath it, clearly there would be residue DNA transfer, whether it's skin fibers, hair fibers, sweat. There's definitely going to be DNA that is going to be picked up inside those gloves. On the other hand, it would not be surprising if someone was to wear latex gloves underneath those gloves. And so while they discarded those gloves, it may turn out to have no evidentiary value. The flip side of that is you have to kind of scratch your head and say, this person went to such lengths to hide and shield his identity, to wear this type of clothing, and to the extent of what he did. And you would have to kind of scratch your head and say, well, then all of a sudden he just, what, threw the gloves outside the window?
Mm.
It just doesn't all add up. So I'm not so sure that I'm hopeful that, and I would hate to think that those gloves were planted there for some publicity stunt, but you never
Mhm.
know.
I want to talk a little bit about the unverified ransom messages that were sent to local stations demanding Bitcoin. I Is FBI still trying to figure out if this is legit? And also, I do want to remind our viewers that the Guthrie family did at one point say that they were, they promised to pay. But just talk to us a little bit about how investigators look into these letters and whether or not they're fake. There's a lot of work behind it, right? So tell us and walk us through that.
Well, look, on its face, obviously, if someone was complicit or is a co-conspirator in the abduction or kidnapping of Nancy Guthrie, then obviously the FBI and law enforcement is going to run that out to its logical conclusion and try to identify and apprehend those people behind those ransom notes. There is one key piece of information that has not been told to the general public, and that is when those ransom notes were first received. And why is that a very important factor with respect to the authenticity of being able to verify the legitimacy of any of those ransom notes? It is because that it wasn't until mid-Sunday that there was a report potentially that Nancy Guthrie was missing. And then it wasn't until Monday that the Pima County Sheriff came out publicly and I said that this missing person was now potentially the victim of a crime. Why is that important? Because if those emails or that email, that first ransom note predated any publicity, you would have to then give it some value, because how would anybody know about Nancy Guthrie being kidnapped or abducted but for the media attention that only came out on Monday? So that little bit of information, which has not been disclosed, there may be some legitimacy, at least to the first ransom note. Everything that follows thereafter, I don't know if it's copycat. It would be very sad to think that there are people out there that are preying on the Guthrie family at this time. But unfortunately, in the world we live in, there are people that would try to seize the opportunity.
Authorities mentioned that, especially after releasing that doorbell video, they received thousands of tips within a 24-hour period. How do they know which one to focus on, and how do they not get overwhelmed with so many tip lines and follow those leads?
Well, there is a processing with respect to when those leads come in, and they are categorized by the amount of information or the amount of detail that may be given or that is attributed to the lead. And look, Luli, it takes a lot of time, a lot of follow-up. You have to interview the person who's reporting that tip. You have to kind of be able to sift through what it is about those photographs. What is it about the video that leads that person to believe they know who that person is? And so, we start with trying to categorize information that has some specificity, some detail, to include, I know the person wasn't home when he was supposed to be Saturday into Sunday. He's been acting or she's been acting very strange since last week. Every time the news comes on, there's some odd behavior. And so we're trying to pick up on some specificity so we can kind of narrow these thousands and thousands of leads. The unfortunate part about all of those leads in some shape or fashion are gonna have to be considered as having some evidentiary value. And that's where it's very time consuming and it takes a lot of effort. And that's what you're seeing undertaken through, we're 11 days into this, 12 days into this now.
It is heartbreaking. And like I mentioned minutes ago, it's captured the nation's attention. The Today Show's co-host, Savannah Guthrie, posted on social media Thursday morning, this morning. It's a video of her mom and her siblings when they were young. And it, of course, is to raise awareness about her missing mom. She says, quote, "We will never give up on her." This comes with the other previous videos that they posted with her and her siblings begging for her safe return. When a family, the victim's family, posts something like this, do they have to ask law enforcement for permission first? And I know they don't want to do anything to jeopardize the investigation, but how does that work?
Well, generally, the FBI will make recommendations as to trying to prevent anything that may hamper or impede or interfere with their ongoing efforts. But at the end of the day, and I've been in that circle where the FBI will tell that family, ultimately, it's up to you to decide. If you so decide to pay that ransom, notwithstanding we don't think we can either track or follow or identify the person who may retrieve that ransom, that solely is up to you. If you want to post something, and again, we're living in a day of social media where this is a very unique situation, because years ago, not too long ago, a family would have to stand behind a podium at a press conference and plead for the public's help. In this day and age, anybody can, in their home, in their office, anywhere in the world, by the use of a phone, have a TikTok account, an Instagram account, a Facebook account, any sort of social media platform, and immediately get the public's awareness and attention. And so the FBI is mindful of that. There's upside to it, and then sometimes there is downside. But to your question, the ultimate decision making is left to the family.
What are the next couple of days going to look like?
Well, Luli, I honestly think that there's been a tremendous amount of progress in this investigation. And there's an old saying that you got to get the right person right. And what does that mean? If you identify and apprehend someone, he or she or they will be prosecuted. That means that all this evidence that is collected is going to have to be presented in a court of law. And obviously, that evidence could be challenged. And the last thing you want to do is make a mistake to create a situation where the case could unravel and someone could be let go because the evidence was suppressed because someone violated some rule of law, some constitutionally protected right. And so patience, time is really on the side of law enforcement. Yes, the family is desperate, but we want to be very methodical, very measured, so that if in fact we're going to go out and apprehend those responsible. We want to make sure we get the right people and get them right.
Thank you so much, former FBI Special Agent Stuart Kaplan, joining us in this conversation today. Thank you.
My pleasure.